Hi friend, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today I'll be doing my November reading wrap-up as well as stats video for the month. This month I ended up reading 7 books, which was I think in part attributed to primarily focusing on nonfiction and one really dense fiction book, but also it was a very busy month at work. There was a lot of different behavior situations that were arising. It felt like a very long month. November really did go on forever. It's crazy to think that at the beginning of November Biden was not the president-elect because just so much has happened in terms of politics and just everything since then. And then we've had Thanksgiving, so it's just been a long month, but I was just not really doing all that much reading this month, and if it was going pretty slowly. So 7 books I'm pretty happy with given how busy and like intense the month was. Those 7 books ended up being about 2,400 pages, and as I said, were primarily nonfiction. There were 5 nonfiction books and 2 fiction books that I read this month. In terms of the 7 books that I finished, all of them were written by women except for one anthology that was a mixture of people of all different genders, and then there were also 4 books written by authors of color, including that anthology, which was exclusively authors of color. I also finished 2 ebooks this month, 4 physical books and 1 book on audio that I had a physical copy of, and all 7 of these books were books from my shelves, which is exciting. However, with the books that I acquired or brought into my book collection this month, I ended up breaking even in terms of my TBR, which puts me at currently 111 books in total on my TBR and then 81 physical books on my TBR, which is about the same as it was back when I made that like TBR reduction plan video several months ago. So that's definitely gonna be a focus of 2021, and that's probably something I'm going to have a video about at some point in the next couple of weeks. Also, in addition to November being a crazy month and affecting my reading in some ways, it also affected my content a little bit. I was not posting as frequently as I really wanted to, but I'm hoping that this month of December I will be posting a lot more, particularly as I have the last 2 weeks of December totally off from work. So I have a lot of content ideas planned for like end of the year stuff and going into 2021 stuff. So I'm hoping to get a lot of that filmed and out there for you. So look forward to more content in the future, in addition to Vlogmas. So I am doing Vlogmas. I'm not doing it the traditional way where you post a video every day, but I am vlogging a little bit every day, and we'll have that first vlog probably going up on Sunday, December 14th. So keep an eye out for that. With all of those announcements, etc. all done with, let's just get into the 7 books that I finished this month. So going from the book that I enjoyed the least to the book that I enjoyed the most, the first one I'm going to talk about is The Bright and Breaking Sea by Chloe Neill. This one I ended up giving only 2.75 stars, and I received as an early copy through NetGalley from Berkeley. This one came out during the month of November on November 17th, and unfortunately I think my low rating of this book was much more attributed to the fact that this is just not the type of book that I really like to read, and I'm not really the target audience for this book, and I don't want to discourage people that do enjoy the kind of tropes that this book is playing with to not pick up this book, because I think you would probably like it. So this is a very light fantasy with strong romantic elements. I wouldn't necessarily even call it a romance, which is what I anticipated it being going into it. That is set in a kind of alternative like Georgian period England type of place. It's shortly after the Napoleonic Wars, or you know, the Napoleonic War equivalent in this world, and we follow naval captain Kit Brightling, who's also kind of a special ops captain spy person, as she is adventuring on a bunch of different secret missions and is offered a new special mission to find a person that's been captured that is also a special operative alongside a former military officer by the name of Ryan Grant, and shenanigans ensue. So primarily the thing that I most disliked about this book was that it was so action and adventure focused, which is not really a genre in general that I particularly like. I don't like action and adventure movies. I don't really like it in books either. I much prefer a character driven as opposed to plot driven story, and this one just had a few too many adventures and like different plot points for me to really be invested in what was happening in the story. Additionally, I also found the plot to be really predictable. I actually guessed who like the big bad villain was right as soon as he entered the story. I was like, this person is bad news. And so that whole element of the plot of like who is kind of behind all of the shenanigans that are happening was not very engaging for me, because I knew that it was obviously this guy. Additionally, I also found the romance in this to be pretty lacking, but I don't think that's necessarily a fault of the book, as this book falls more into the category of romances that follow one romantic couple for several books, and we follow their romance as it develops very slowly over the course of different other events happening in the series, and I just don't really like that in my romances. I like them to be pretty self-contained, and if it's a romance series, for it to follow different romantic characters as we move through the series. So that was another thing that I don't think Chloe Neill did wrong necessarily. It's just not a personal preference of mine, and so that did also bring my rating down because I wanted more of the romantic parts of the story, and that just wasn't the point of this like first novel in the series. Additionally, there also was a little bit of questionable, in my eyes, like diversity that was thrown in that didn't really feel true to form. In part, there are a few non-white side characters that, in all honesty, I didn't entirely pick up until I read reviews by other early reviewers that they were non-white characters. Like, they didn't really read at all, aside from my brief description of what their skin color looked like, to be non-white characters, and that didn't feel like an integral part of the plot, which made me kind of skeptical and frustrated in that, like, why make them white if you're not going to include any discussions on like racism in the world or how their race is like impacted by the machinations of this world. So I was kind of frustrated by that element, and that may be improved and kind of added upon in future books in this series, as this is the start to a series. But yeah, I just found that to be somewhat surprising upon reading some other reviews of being like people kind of praising this book for having non-white, like, diverse characters, and honestly I like did not even notice that there were any non-white characters in the book, particularly as it's so focused on this very whitewashed element of history of like the Napoleonic Wars. While I think definitely there's room to include diversity in kind of an alternative history retelling of that time period, I don't think that this book did that really in any interesting or engaging ways. So that was another kind of frustration I had with this book, and overall it just wasn't really a book for me. But I do think if you like these kind of slow burn, very plot focused romance novels that are kind of more popular in like the fantasy paranormal romance genre, that you may enjoy this one quite a lot. Additionally, if you also like kind of seafaring adventures and military history, then you may also find this interesting. But again, those are things that are not really very engaging to me. So I ended up, as I said, only giving this 2.75 stars. I did like Chloe Neill's writing, and I would maybe be interested in reading something else that she writes, but if it's all this kind of slow burn romance, I probably won't pick up anything else that she has written. Moving on to my next lowest rated book, which was the last book that I finished during the month, we have Revolutions by Hannah Ross, How Women Changed the World on Two Wheels. So this is one of my nonfiction picks of the month, and this is a history of women's cycling, primarily the relationship between women's rights activists and cycling, although there is some discussion on women's cycling competitions and competitive professional cycling and the gender gaps therein, which I did find that part very interesting. But overall, I thought this was fine. I enjoyed some of what I learned from this book, but I don't think it's going to be a new favorite, and I did have some gripes with it. Primarily that it's just very European, UK, US focused, and I was kind of wishing that there was more about the global south and its relationship to cycling as a form of transportation, particularly given that China is obviously a place where bicycling is hugely important to their transportation infrastructure, and China was mentioned maybe one time. I don't think it's even in the index. So that felt like a huge gap to me. But then also whenever any other countries, particularly Afghanistan, was mentioned at one point, and the only story about Afghanistan was really this white woman who went and like traveled there and was like, I felt pretty safe even though the women there are really oppressed. And I was like, this is not good. This is not how we should be like talking about the global south. But anyway, so that whole aspect of the story I just really felt like was lacking, and I wanted to see more about the kind of global impacts of the bicycle on like women's rights. And I think Hannah Ross attempted to do that, but it just felt like a very Western feminist lens surrounding all of that discussion that I didn't particularly love. Additionally, it also just felt very anecdotal. I didn't get the best sense of like the overall scope of the history of cycling for women. It was much more kind of nitpicked different stories about, albeit very interesting, women in history who used cycling to kind of further their rights and for the rights of women more broadly in their society. But I didn't feel like those women gave me a kind of full picture of what cycling looked like for women during that time. Overall, I thought this was fine. I did definitely learn some stuff, particularly about the kind of history of the bicycle as an object, which I thought was interesting. I did find Ross to be a really engaging writer, and I think she obviously loves cycling, and that really came through on the page. But I just kind of wish there were other things that I was more interested in that this book had included. However, you know, that's again a personal preference of mine and not necessarily something wrong with the book, although I do think some of those things really should have been part of this if this was going to be a kind of more comprehensive look at the history of women's cycling. And I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Then moving on to my next pick, which I gave 3.5 stars, we have Black is the Body, Stories from My Grandmother's Time, My Mother's Time, and Mine by Emily Bernard. And this one was also fine. I didn't particularly love it, although I do think it is probably worth the read. I really appreciated Bernard's style. Bernard is an academic. She is a professor of English at the University of Vermont, and so she writes very well. I think I liked the elements of kind of the personal narrative style, but then also it felt very kind of formal and academic and professional, which I really appreciated. I do like kind of more formal writing in personal essays. I find sometimes personal essays can feel a little too conversational, and often I don't jive with that, which I think is probably, I'm in the minority with that. So I did appreciate that element of Bernard's writing. I also found the ways that she centered herself in these stories to be really useful. I don't think she was trying to make any broader statements on like the Black experience. She was simply talking about her own experiences and kind of how they have shaped her, which I appreciated. I did read some reviews shortly after finishing this that talked about how they wished Bernard had gone a bit more into navigating Blackness in very white spaces, given that she lives in Vermont, which, while it's touted as being a very progressive state, is also, I think, the whitest state in the United States. Additionally, she's an academic, and academia is also a very white place, so I think there were some places where she could have discussed that a little bit more, particularly her relationship with Blackness, given that she is married to a white man and she is in a place that is very white. I think there could have been more discussion there, but at the same time, I think that was not her goal in this particular collection, which I do agree with. I think she could have gone into depth a bit more about those topics. Additionally, I also wish the essays had been a bit more varied. By the time I got through like 2/3 of the essays, I really felt like I had kind of heard everything that she wanted to talk about. Particularly, a lot of the essays are focused on her transnational adoption of her 2 twin daughters from Ethiopia and the kind of struggles therein, and understanding how she wants to raise them and the different ways race is replicated between her and her past and her daughter's past being immigrants to the United States, that I all found really interesting. It just kind of got a bit repetitive as we continue to kind of return to those same ideas and themes, and I didn't particularly feel that there were new ideas being presented in the later essays that she'd not already kind of touched on in earlier essays. So those were kind of my main gripes with it. I do think if these are topics that are really interesting to you and potentially you want to read more personal essays about this, that I would recommend this. However, I think if you read a lot of personal essays, memoirs about the Black experience and Blackness in academia and adoption and family and history, that I'm not entirely sure how much you'll get out of this one. But granted, I mean, it is personal essays and memoirs are all individual experiences, so you would get something in it that you are reading Bernard's experience. So I kind of would say hit or miss with this one in terms of picking it up yourself, but if you have it on your radar already, I would still probably recommend checking it out. The next book in terms of star rating is Be My Guest by Priya Basil. This one I gave 4 stars and was also an early copy that I got through NetGalley. This one came out from Knopf on November 3rd, so it's been out for quite a while. So this is a very long form essay in the form of a book that is basically ruminations on the idea of hospitality, both in the kind of dinner party sense, but also in terms of providing and creating a welcoming community with regards to like immigration and refugee crises. So I thought that was a really interesting intersection of ideas of hospitality in a very personalized way, but also ideas of hospitality in a like globalized community way. I thought the way that Priya Basil intersected those things was done really well. I also found her discussions of food, particularly as it referenced her Sikh background and her childhood growing up as a British Indian in Kenya. I thought those discussions were also really fascinating, and the ways that she interwove religion and her religious practices, or her family's religious practices really, into her understandings of ideas of hospitality were also really well done. Overall, I did really enjoy this one. I love food writing, and I also think that community building and hospitality when it comes to immigrants and refugees is something that is really important, and I really agreed with kind of everything that she was discussing here. So yeah, if you are interested in any of those topics, I would probably recommend this. I think it interweaves a lot of different ideas in a really consolidated and cohesive way. I appreciated it. It's a fun little book, easy to get through in kind of an afternoon if these are topics that interest you. So this one, as I said, I gave 4 stars, did really enjoy it, would recommend it. Then the only other fiction book that I read this month was The Old Drift by Neill, which I gave 4.25 stars, and I actually have a whole review of this one up on my channel, so I'll put a link to that up in the cards above as well as in the description box below. But overall, I really enjoyed this one. It is a very smart, dense historical literary novel that begins in the early 1900s in what later becomes Zambia, and tracks the history of the country through its independence and its kind of political history up until the near future, wherein it begins to kind of incorporate some science fiction elements that are also very fascinating and very intelligently done. So I really enjoyed this one, but it is quite a project to undertake, so do be aware of that before going into it. But yeah, 4.25 stars for The Old Drift. And then getting into my final two reads of the month, both of which I definitely think could make my favorites list of the year. I loved both of these books and would highly, highly recommend them. The first of which is The Third Rainbow Girl, The Long Life of a Double Murder in Appalachia by Emma Copley Eisenberg. And this one was so good. I originally gave it 4.5 stars, but honestly, I might give it 5 stars because I am still thinking about this book quite a lot. And I just really appreciated the kind of nuances and just uniqueness that this book brought to the genres that it is playing with. So this is part memoir, and I would say it's primarily memoir, but it also incorporates a lot of true crime, as the subtitle would suggest, but then also a lot of kind of personal ruminations. And there's no really way to describe it other than just like American studies. So if you're not familiar with the ideas and theories of American studies, you won't know what I'm talking about. But if you are, hopefully that gives you a picture of like what this book is trying to do about the complexity of Appalachia, particularly West Virginia, where this book is set, which is also a place that I have a lot of close connections to. My family has history there. My dad's side of the family is from West Virginia, and we also still have a family house there that I've been to many times. And so West Virginia and Appalachia more broadly are places that I think about a lot, particularly in terms of them being misunderstood on the greater kind of political landscape. And so this novel really kind of spoke to me on a lot of those topics, because I think Emma Copley Eisenberg shares similar views about how Appalachia is misunderstood and the kind of truth behind what really Appalachia is all about that I really appreciated. You can tell from reading this book that Eisenberg has a deep appreciation and love for West Virginia and the people of West Virginia, and then thereby the people of Appalachia more broadly. So I really appreciated that element of this book. And I also know Kendra Winchester, who's the Appalachian queen of BookTube, also really enjoyed this book for that reason. So if you don't trust me, trust Kendra, because Kendra really enjoyed this one as well. I do think, however, that if you are really into true crime or really into memoir, you might not love this book, because in all honesty, it's not really about either of those things. Particularly the true crime elements, I didn't find, granted, I'm not a big true crime fan, but I didn't find those to be particularly compelling. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions about this murder, and Eisenberg is not really attempting to answer any of those questions, which I think is a primary element of like the true crime genre, is trying to figure out the truth of what really happened. Whereas Eisenberg, that is not her goal whatsoever. It's much more about discussing the crime as it relates to like broader discussions of Appalachian culture. And then additionally, the kind of memoir side of things, I do think Eisenberg has some typical moments here of memoir, talking about her experience living in West Virginia as an AmeriCorps member. How she grew from those experiences are definitely touched upon in this book, but I think she does a really good job of not centering herself in this story, given that she is not from West Virginia, and this book is really a celebration of West Virginia and Appalachia, and so she knows she's not a part of that, even though she has this deep appreciation for the state and that she has these experiences. She is still kind of separate from those. So I think also in terms of memoir, she does a really good job of distancing herself from the kind of core of this story, while at the same time also centering herself and the core of this story, which I really appreciated, but I don't think lovers of memoir might always appreciate that. So yeah, I think this one could be potentially a Marmite book. I know it has some mixed reviews on Goodreads, but I absolutely loved it. It really ticks all of my boxes, and I truly cannot wait to see what else Emma Copley Eisenberg does. I do know she has a book deal for, I believe, a short story collection and a novel coming out in the next couple years, so I'm super excited about whenever those come out, and would really recommend this if understanding Appalachia and kind of a mishmash of different genres is something that would appeal to you. I think you would definitely enjoy this one quite a lot. Then finally, my last book that I'm going to talk about in this video was another one that I think really just touched on a lot of personal buttons for me, particularly like ruminations about place, which is a big kind of hot ticket item for me. And that was A Measure of Belonging, 21 Writers of Color on the New American South, edited by Cinelle. And this one's out from Hub City Press, which is one of my favorite small independent presses. And this one I gave 5 stars to. I absolutely loved it. And I actually completed this on November 7th, I think it was, which was the day that it was announced that Joe Biden was going to be president-elect, which felt really timely, particularly that this is about the South and Georgia had turned blue during this election cycle. And so I was having a lot of feelings about the diversity of the South and how it gets written off as this place full of white conservative people, when in my experience that is very much not the case. And I think this book also helped to enhance all of those thoughts that I was having around that time, given that these are all works by people who are either from the South or have moved to the South, many of whom are Black, but other people are immigrants to the United States, about their experiences in the South, and many of whom only upon leaving the South realized how formative it was for them and how unique of a place it was, which I really appreciated, but also the kind of dichotomous nature of the South and being both a place that really welcomes anti-racism work and diversity, but also is a place that has this very segregationist history and very violent history against people of color. And so that kind of dichotomous nature of the South is something that I think is really fascinating, and I think all of the authors in here did explore really phenomenally. Additionally, the writing in here is just great. There's no essay in here that I did not think was phenomenally written, and I would definitely pick up anything by any of the authors in here in the future. I'm trying to remember a few of my absolute favorites of the collection, but that's honestly quite hard to do because I just loved all of them so much. I did really enjoy Osai and Dylan's Southern Cooking by Indian American Chefs Offer Fresh Ways to Connect. That one was really nice. I also really enjoyed Minda Honey's Auntie, Irene Kaship's Are You Muslim and Other Questions White Landlords Ask Me. Yeah, there were, oh, and then Christina Cleveland's White Devil in Blue, Duke Basketball, Religion, and Modern Day Slavery in the New South was really, really good. So yeah, in general, all of these were just absolutely phenomenal. Would highly recommend them. It's a great collection. If you like personal essays, if you like essays about place and feelings of belonging, as the title would suggest, then I truly can't recommend this one enough. So those are the 7 books that I finished during the month of November. If you have read any of these books or are now interested in reading them, please do let me know down in the comment section below. Additionally, if you have any books about place themes, as that was kind of a big theme of this month's reading, that you have really enjoyed, also let me know down in the comment section below. That is truly one of my buzzwords. I love discussions and ruminations about place and how it relates to belonging and identity and all those things. So yeah, any of those recommendations, do let me know down in the comment section below. And if you found my channel through this video, I'd love to have you stick around and subscribe. And I think that's everything. I will talk to you next time.